So thank you everybody for tuning in for this seminar. This is not really what I had looked forward to, but it has become the new normal. So today I will talk about one of the projects that I'm working on, or I had worked on recently, on wood bioenergy for rural energy resilience in Eastern Kentucky, looking at spatial and economic analysis. So I just want to recognize members of this team because this is not my own work. I have worked together with Dr. Contreras and Dr. Young, together with Chad Kenton, who is now in the College of Honors College. And we also worked with some undergraduate students, Dan Eaton from our department, and 2 students from computer science, Diraj and Jordan George, who did a great job working with us. So I would want to, first of all, give a broad overview of my research program here by starting to look at what are some of the uniqueness of forestry that inform my research program here. So I would go through this very quickly. First of all, multiplicity of benefits or products in forestry. So we have a lot of benefits that we get from forestry, which come with different constraints, and the dilemma would be which benefit should we optimize or maximize for? The second is the long-term nature, rotation of forestry, 10 to 100 years. This also has impacts or affects investment decisions that we make, profitability, and alternative land uses options that we can consider apart from forestry itself. Geographical and biological variation is another factor which brings with it some management challenges, and of course transboundary impacts. So whatever affects one forest can have spillover effects on the neighboring forest or state or a county, if you look at things like pests and diseases. So my research program here at the department is basically an integrated biophysical economic analysis and modeling. This is just a snapshot from my webpage. So what this means is I'm not just looking at the economic analysis in isolation, but looking at an integrated system of what are the economic implications of the biophysical systems. So making economic sense out of the biophysical processes that are taking place in forests. So this is just a general structure of my research program here. On the left side, I look at these biophysical inputs, policy, ecosystem services, climate change, technology, markets, and factors of production, labor, and capital, and going through these modeling suites and parameters to get some outputs out of it, and then linking that backwards to those inputs, how the outputs affect inputs in the subsequent rounds. So back to this particular project, a broad overview of the project was basically we wanted to connect the dots between wood industry waste. So there is a lot of sawdust or chips and bark that come from forest processes, like in the sawmills or in or other wood producing industries, and the energy resilience. So where resilience here is basically having a reliable and uninterrupted power supply, and linking this to critical infrastructure. These are basically facilities that would require an interrupted power supply, like hospitals, water treatment plants, police stations, and things like that. So the question was, can wood waste or based bioenergy infrastructure give us some improved energy resiliency in rural Kentucky? So just to give a little background here, what is energy resiliency and why is this important? So according to McClellan, 2012, energy resiliency has to do with some capacity of the energy grid to maintain supply in the midst of disastrous circumstances. So things like tornadoes or natural disasters, you should have an interrupted power supply. So you know what happens when such natural disasters occur, when we're relying on a grid that is coming from far distance, what happens to some areas. So shifting energy production from fossil fuels to a more decentralized, localized source can improve this resiliency. And rural communities typically are more vulnerable than urban or suburban communities to non-resilient energy infrastructure. So you've seen what happens if there is, for instance, a natural disaster. The rural areas basically are the last ones to get power restored to them. So a lot of attention is focused to the big cities and urban areas. So they usually get the first responders or rescue to restore their power supply. So what are the opportunities? We looked at the opportunities for wood bioenergy in rural Kentucky, particularly in the eastern side, and we were looking at what is available. Can this be done at economically viable scale? So from the work that we have been doing in economic contribution analysis, forest industry in Kentucky is worth about 14 billion in terms of total output of economic contribution. And the sawmills from the forest industry sawmills in Kentucky produce over 2 million of cubic feet of residuals, bark, chips, and sawdust that basically go unused. So this is according to USDA report 2015. So what can we do with this waste, quote unquote? In most of the rural areas, particularly in the Appalachian region, the economic development indicators are not very good. And we thought that maybe they could benefit from a diversified economy by having to rely on more than just one sector. Of course, we know that region has been very much reliant on coal sector, or coal industry, which has been going downhill for several decades now. So developing a wood waste-based energy in this part of Kentucky could provide some market opportunities for these unused residuals by reducing the sawmill cost in terms of getting rid of this waste, but also providing some jobs in the region at the same time. So studies that have been done in other parts of the country, like Mississippi, Texas, and also in Northwest, have given a glimmer of hope in terms of the potential opportunity of economic contribution that we can gain by having a bio-based energy production. You see different varying number of jobs and economic outputs from Mississippi to Texas and Northwest. Of course, these studies were conducted at different regional scales, so we cannot just assume we are going to have the same thing in Eastern Kentucky. So apart from that direct economic benefit, there are also other ecological benefits that can be gained by making use of the wood waste that is coming from the forest, but more so in terms of harvesting the less valuable, what we call less valuable timber out of the forest, which would otherwise have not been targeted by loggers for the traditional forest industries. So another point again is in terms of carbon emission reduction. So there are also climate change benefits to implementing bioenergy project. So we had these two research questions. The first one was, are there critical infrastructure sites in Eastern Kentucky which would be suitable, of course, based on the distance of the sawmills that are producing this wood waste, for us to establish a wood-fired combined heat and power unit. So combined heat and power unit here means it is not a power plant that is 100% reliant on wood on wood biomass, but combined with coal. So it is a combined heat and the other power source. The second question was, if the bioenergy industry were to be developed in Eastern Kentucky, how would it impact the region's economy, or what would be the potential economic impact? So we selected the 35 Eastern Kentucky or the Central Appalachian counties. You can see here with the orange, yellow shading here for this critical infrastructure that we consider emergency services, which specifically need a consistent and reliable uninterrupted power supply. We also considered one main energy systems, which is the transportation. So there is a lot of wood waste materials that are available there that would be used in bioenergy production. Research approach, the title here we had spatial and economic. So I'll go through the spatial component first. So this component, which was ably guided by Dr. Young, we looked at these 35 Appalachian counties of Kentucky and assessed which ones met the goals in terms of biomass quantities to meet the rural energy resilience and to supply the wood that would be needed from the wood-based industries. So I developed a geospatial database, including locations of the sawmills. So where were the sawmills located from the reported estimates and the residual productions that would potentially be available from the forest nearby. With that, the next step was to build a database for critical infrastructure, including hospitals and emergency services, And in doing this, we did not look at all the hospitals, but focused on the ones that the ones with a high energy demand based on capacity. And this was done through estimation of energy consumption, which is estimated from the hospital size. So there is database of energy consumption by hospitals by um, capacity, by hospital capacity. With that, the next was to estimate the transportation costs as a factor of distance and travel time from the sawmills to the hospital. So we were assuming that we'd have these CHP power plants at closer proximity to the hospitals. So we estimated through travel transportation analysis using Google Maps to estimate the travel time along existing roads to the nearest hospitals, and converted the travel time to costs estimated at $80 per hour. So with that, the selected hospitals with power demand that would support the use of CHP, 100 kilowatt hour or 2 megawatt units were considered for 5 out of 7 days. That would support power supply 5 out of 7 days, a minimum. So we estimated the feedstock required to run the CHP and the cost of transportation that would be required to transport the available feedstock from the nearest mills, and estimated the cost of purchasing the waste at same amount of electricity from the grid. So we did this so that we would avoid a situation whereby purchasing electricity from the grid would be cheaper, so at least same amount. So that was the break-even point. So with the hospitals that were sufficiently close to the mills identified, and the transportation of the residuals that could give us economic feasibility. So if it was outside a certain range, then it would be it would not break even. So those ones were excluded. So we only considered what was within economic feasibility region of the distance from the mills to the feedstock site. So with this, we supplemented those existing waste from the mills through a simulated harvesting of low quality or unmarketable timber from surrounding forests. So we used FIA dataset, and the assumption here was that any tree that was less than 12.5 inches DBS was considered unmarketable. And the trees that were marked as rough cull or rotten cull were also considered as unmarketable. So there is something to note here that while not all trees that are less than 12.5 inches DBH are truly unmarketable, the understory of many of these forests are basically dominated by undesirable and unmarketable trees that if we remove them, we would improve the quality of those forests. So that was on the spatial analysis. So we quantified what was available, how much could we take at economically feasible to where. So on the economic side, we now, with all that information, we assumed that that feedstock would go into electricity production. So the electricity production sector would pay for the feedstock to produce energy. Going to the economic impact, which is the component that I worked on directly, I employed a general equilibrium model, which is looking at the transactions within the economy between different industries. So to produce electricity, you need a number of things. from different sectors. You need capital, you need labor, you need other things that go into that process, not just for electric production industry, but all sectors of the economy. So we used in-plan social accounting matrix just for these 35 counties that was extracted from the Kentucky in-plan that we have, which is 120 counties. So we basically aggregated the 35 counties and considered that as a region of study. So out of over 400 industries, we aggregated this into 11 most relevant sectors just for the analysis. So we had these 11 sectors: agriculture, logging, bioenergy, and other electricity, of course, produced from other sources, electric power transmission and distribution. So this is that sector that is going to supply the power from the power plants. We also have natural gas distribution. We have coal mining, wood products manufacturing, transportation, all services, and everything else was lumped together as the rest of the economy. So with that, we have now the basic data here in the form of social accounting matrix, and which went through some data adjustments here to specify other variables that go into this work, and then we calibrated the model to get the benchmark from which we conducted some shocks, as I will show you in a bit. So how does this work? In more broad terms, what we have here as the final total output is like the electricity, if I take that sector. So we have 11 of them. So each one of the sectors I have shown you is having this kind of production and consumption structure. So that total output requires labor and capital, and let's say land, theoretically. And it also requires some other intermediate inputs from different sectors that join together, which we can import from other regions in the United States, or import from outside the United States. So the final output that comes from that, we can sell to the domestic market, meaning within the region of study, or we export to rest of the US or to rest of the world. So here is just a summary of that database that we were working with. And as you can see, there are 35 counties, but we have a regional GDP of 24 billion for those 35 counties. Just for your understanding, Kentucky as a whole is having a GDP of about 210 billion. So this is basically around just 10% of the GDP. So it is not really big. But 35 counties is roughly a quarter of 120 counties. So the area is just 10% of the total economic output for the entire state. So we have population here of 850,000, over about 340,000 households with the average household income of $80,000, and employee compensation, the income that people get from the work they do, is about 30 billion, and we have other proprietor income coming in at about 7 billion, and taxes at about 1.8 billion. So most of the consumption is basically driven by the households. The households consume a lot, about 25 billion of what is contributing to the GDP. Of course, we have imports, which are payments, so these are negatives, and other transfers from government. So this is the summary of the whole economic database that we're dealing with. So with that put together, we looked at 3 scenarios, basically some policy scenarios. So we needed a baseline because a general equilibrium model is a comparative analysis. So you start with something and then you do a shock and then you get a new level, and then the difference is the impact of the shock that you had put there. So we need a baseline to start. We got into a problem here because the social accounting matrix data that we had from Implant did not report any bioenergy production for this region. So I used a Department of Energy database which lists Kentucky to have about 0.6% of its energy coming from bioenergy. Most of these are basically generated by wood-based industries. So they are not reported, and for this region, there wasn't any. So we needed some baseline to start with, because you cannot increase something by 1% if it is at 0. So we started at a 0.6% assumption of bioenergy for the region, since we didn't have any other number. So we looked at 3 scenarios. The first one was we want to increase demand for biomass for bioenergy production at low, medium, and high. So at low, we basically did a 50% increase from the baseline by increasing the share of the electric power from 0.6 to 0.9% of total electricity production. At the medium, we increased it by 100%, which still is not much, is only at 1.2%. And then the high level, we had a 138% increase from the baseline, which is just 1.4% from the initial baseline. Somebody may ask, how did we decide on 50, 100, and 138? 138, I tried several higher numbers, but the constraints in the model would not allow us to go beyond that. So that was the maximum that the model was able to work with. So the second consideration that we considered to stimulate or to provide economic incentive for renewable energy was to increase the cost of non-renewable electricity. And the easiest way to do this in economic model is to increase tariffs on non-renewable energy, so energy from coal, for instance, which the baseline was at 9.5%. So we increased this by 5%. So we increased this by 5% from the baseline. So at the low level. At the medium level, we increased that tariff by 10%. And then at the high, we increased that tariff by 20%. So that would make electricity from non-renewable sources to be more expensive, which would shift demand to renewable energy. Okay, so going to the results, the spatial analysis. So we identified 19 hospitals as qualified candidate sites for building 100 kilowatt hour combined heat power, 4 of which could also be candidates for a 2 megawatt combined heat and power. And here they are scattered across the counties based on total residue or biomass feedstock that would be economically feasible to supply to those particular plants. Looking at the FIA data, the available low-grade timber, also we did this by counting in terms of low-grade biomass, the proportion of the low-grade biomass by county, and you can see how this varied across the counties that we were targeting. We have these pictures here showing some of the crooked trees that I talked about. Even though they are larger in DBH, they are of poor quality, and therefore they cannot be harvested for the normal industrial wood manufacturing activities. So these are some of the ones that we considered for as bioenergy feedstock. So we developed this web tool here, which was pretty cool. Of course, I don't know how it works. We had computer gurus working on this, and I tried this the other day, but it appeared that, let me see if it is going to work. We had, let's see, it is supposed to be interactive to provide us with information on what is available. So you click here, map.
Thomas, we can't see that. We're still seeing your PowerPoint. You might need to either share your desktop or share that individual window.
Okay, so let me go there, okay?
Thomas, you may need to stop sharing and then re-share the screen that you want to share.
Right. I've stopped that. So let me share this. Can you see this now? Hello?
Yes, we can see your PowerPoint slide with the map.
Which with the title Web Tool Demonstration?
Yes.
Yes. So we have this web tool here that you can see on the legend here. We have mills, and then we have police stations, then we have hospitals, fire department, and then the locations of the 100 kilowatt power feasible locations and the 2 megawatt hour feasible locations. So you could click a particular mill and you get the information of how much is there, how much mill waste are they able to generate, and what is the distance and all that. So I don't think that is going to work very well here now, but I will share this out and you can play around with it to see. Unfortunately, the website is currently dormant. It doesn't interact as well as it was at the beginning. So here's the website, which is supposed to be very interactive in terms of you can filter out mills only, you can filter out hospitals and see what is their capacity, how much do they take, and etc. etc. So going to results of economic impacts. Going to results. So we looked at the 3 scenarios: low, medium, high, where we are increasing tariffs and also we are increasing demand for biomass for bioenergy production. So this table presents household income. Remember, we were pitching this project as one of those that can help these rural households with economic opportunities. So on the first column, we have household annual income category, meaning these households are earning between 0 to 40,000 in a year. Then the medium household category is those that are earning between 40 to 100,000. And then the high income household category are the ones that are earning over 100,000. And then the second column here, number of households, presents how many households fall within the category to the left, okay? And you can see majority of the households in this region, 56% fall under low household income, meaning they are earning between 0 to 40,000 in a year. and then the medium one is 34%, and then the high income is only 10%. So how did this policies shock? How did this affect or would affect their income? Okay, so under model scenarios, under law, we are having $50,000 for the low household income, and the medium is $100,000, and then under the high we have over 200,000. Remember, this is shared among all the households that you are seeing on the second column, and the same is repeated. The same explanation applies to the rest of the households. In parentheses, we have the percentage change from the baseline. As you can see, the percentage change from the baseline is pretty small, 0.0 something. But there is one thing here that I wanted you to note. As much as we were pitching this to benefit the poor, the rural poor, because most of these economic developments are usually pitched that, oh, this is going to benefit the rural poor. But if you look at this, even though the household category of higher income, which are only 10%, they're getting more benefits in terms of actual dollar amounts than the poor households, if you look at the numbers. So that again raises issues of equity. Who pays, who benefits? Do these rural development projects really benefit those people who they are supposed to benefit? Okay. Looking at GDP, most people really think GDP is such a big economic indicator of development. As economists, I say no. GDP does not measure welfare. GDP just measures what is the gross total economic output of a region. Whether that economic output is by 2 people or 5 people, 10% or 20% is what matters. Who really has a share in that GDP? And here I did different types of GDP. GDP at factor cost, meaning the salaries and the capital incomes, and GDP also at factor prices, and then GDP, the value added, that would include wages, capital, plus indirect business taxes. And you can see how the results vary here across the 3 scenarios. Not very much in terms of the percent from the baseline, but we have GDP at factor cost ranging from 300,000 to 1.5 billion. Of course, when you bring in all the taxes, it gets very huge. So whenever we talk of GDP, you have to ask, what GDP are you really talking about here? Then the last one, which to me is my favorite in economic analysis, is the welfare impact. So what is welfare? We always talk about welfare. What is welfare? So welfare is how you as a consumer fare on relative to prior condition. So something has happened. So are you better off today than you were before that change took place? I want to give you an example. If you are spending $100, your income is $100, and you spend that $100 to pay your rent and buy all that you need, and then the next year, your employer tells you that I've given you a 20% raise, meaning you are now earning $120. Okay. However, prices have increased, and instead of being able to get your goods, whatever you are buying, with your new salary, you can, for you to buy all that you are buying and pay the rent you are paying, you will need $150,000. Are you better off with the salary increment and the price increment, or are you better off, or were you better off before your salary was increased at the old prices? The answer is, it would have been better for you if you did not get salary increment and if the prices did not change. So that is what welfare measures. So from this table here, based on the same categories of the households, you can see again the disproportionate welfare impacts across the three household categories. So the high income categories are getting basically the lion's share proportionate to their population of the welfare benefits of this intervention. So as development economists or as policymakers, we have to think of how do we design policies that would not only incentivize households or rural households to engage in certain economic activities, but how do we make sure that they are the people who benefit, as opposed to the economic development goes in their name, but they end up not benefiting as much as we would have wished for them to benefit. So how do we move forward from this? I didn't mention this, but we did this project in such a rush. We were given 6 months to work on this project, but by the time we signed the contract and everything was ready and we engaged students, we had already lost 2 months. So we were basically left with 4 months. And the economic component usually comes last. And that last month, I got sick. I was away for some time. So we would be happy going forward to do a more comprehensive site-specific evaluation of economic feasibility for each candidate site, whereby we would be looking at startup and maintenance cost of running these power plants. And another aspect or component that would also be interesting to look at is subsidy, providing some subsidy. So subsidies are negative taxes. Instead of you paying government taxes, government pays you, which is basically a tax break. They have different impacts in the economy, and cost share programs, cost share options. So if you produce 50%, the government can give you so much. And that has been really going on with a lot of these agricultural promotion programs for rural economic development, particularly like energy efficiency, solar power, and all those kind of green economies. What would also be the potential applications for other wood waste-based industrial applications? So there are a lot of research going on. We have over-focused on this bioenergy, but there are also other wood waste-based industrial applications that can be explored to make use of this available resource. As I conclude, I would want to acknowledge our funding sources, USDA, through Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet, through a statewide wood energy team, we call it SWEAT project, who were gracious enough to give us funding to work on this project. So with that, I think I would entertain some questions. I know there is a lot to ask and to follow up on. Thank you very much.